Of course, it's a female. That's a total Whammon moment right there. But it just goes to show that these people they're not our people. These Republicans they're not our people. They don't get it. They just don't get it. They think these are just civic nationalists, and it's their line go up people. That's not what we're about. We're not about line go up.
I remember going to her website and typing AIPAC and getting 0 results, and I was instantly suspicious of it. There are certain groups that civic nationalists consider friendly that they seem to have censored off that Data Republican website. I think that it was primarily a tool against the left, which good, but it was not a tool to reflect on how the right is captured, and that is concerning. And I think here we're seeing it again. They're just about GDP. They're just about their friends and allies. We're not their friends. We're just this useful. They view us as kind of like the useful idiots to get into power, and that's kind of like you feel used when you realize that.
Shut up, silly woman.
Exactly.
Do you think that this is an interesting question? So I have a different perspective. I hate the GDP line go up thing. I get into debates about this frequently. It's not a good representation of median well-being. It's a terrible representation of median well-being. But there is an obvious reason why a lot of people care about it, even those who aren't aligned with our enemies. And that's because GDP is essentially what allows us to keep on borrowing money.
Yeah.
And we're borrowing money against future GDP, which means that if the GDP growth stops, the money printers stop going brr, which means that we have a catabolic collapse of the Western financial systems. And that is something that is, a huge can of worms that we haven't even begun to unwrap yet. I mean, ideally, this is also one of the reasons why some people have speculated that the ruling class might be pulling back on immigration, it appears, at least in some areas of Europe and in Canada. I never know how seriously to take this rhetoric, but certainly the rhetoric is in that direction. And one possible reason is that in the last 5 years, it's become very, very apparent that not only is immigration deleterious to median well-being, which you can see quite clearly, but also that the immigrants they're bringing in are net negatives on GDP, which they do care about, because if they don't have that, they can't keep on printing the money and borrowing.
Which begs the question why we haven't, or at least our elite haven't gotten this memo, because the obsession with picking your cherished third world group to bring over here to work your jobs, when we all know they're just going to be on welfare and taking hiding a lot of tax money through remittances. I just don't understand why they haven't got them. I do see that nations like England, Poland, and France, they're getting the memo. They realize it. They realize it is actually in fact dropping the GDP the more immigrants they bring in, because they're all on welfare and not contributing to the workforce. So when are our elite going to get that memo? Because they should have gotten it by now.
Well, I mean, I think that they're just trying to get more power inside the sort of the primary superpower of the West. So they're thinking, oh, well, maybe it'll tank the economy, but I'm still trying to get as much power as possible before this thing collapses. That's obviously the countervailing logic. And immigrants give that to them in the short term.
I want to take that and run with it a little bit. Go ahead, Pete.
Go ahead, Paul. No, go ahead, please.
Okay. I just want to take that and run with it a little bit. You talk about how, maybe the mindset amongst the elite is yeah, this thing is inevitably going to collapse, but I want to make sure that I get my little corner secure before it does. I think that's the prevailing attitude amongst a lot of people. One of the things I've kind of been obsessing with is, since I even got started, is the concept of decline and collapse and crisis, and what will eventually bring this to an end. And the same way that we were talking about in the last segment, how this parasitic political economy that exists amongst this elite that basically goes from institution to institution, breaking the credibility and all of that. I don't underestimate the capacity of this group of people to keep things going just long enough to ensure that they've siphoned as much out as they possibly can. And I don't know if there's any way to keep them from doing that, right? This actually gets into the topic of a couple of the talks that we had at the conference as to how you react to that. I personally, I don't know. I don't think there's any way around this catabolic collapse. And I don't think there's any way that we can make these people pay for taking all of the money out of our system, because they all have their landing pads more or less pre-selected. And this has been an ongoing thing since the 70s. So in all honesty, I think the best thing for us to do, and the best thing for us to focus on, and something that the Old Glory Club is starting to focus on, is, rather than attempting to map out how these people are taking the money or how they're shattering and emptying the vault, start making plans for what you're going to do whenever this catabolic collapse inevitably occurs, because everyone and their mother can tell you that this system based on endless lending doesn't end very well.
One of my favorite old letter collections, I think it's by Sidonius. It's basically the meeting minutes between the Gothic kings and the surviving Roman Senate after the Western imperial system collapsed. And one of the things that constantly gets brought up by the Gothic monarch when they're meeting with the Senate is, who gave you this tax relief? Who gave you these workers? Who, like, the Gothic kings don't understand how these Italian noblemen cut out a part of the former empire for themselves without anyone noticing. And they're just flabbergasted by the amount of tax-free, easy living so many of the elite were living as the empire burned down. They thought they would find them impoverished and in need, but instead they found them living on their own little fortified piece of the pie. And one of the most common things I see in these meeting minutes in it's supposed to be the 7th and 8th centuries, is the Gothic king looking at this and just stripping out all the benefits away and retaxing them to maximum amounts, because they haven't paid their dues to what they were calling the Roman Commonwealth in the post-imperial system. And I don't want to wait for some foreign conqueror to come here and berate our elite for being so selfish. I don't want to wait my whole life watching them make their little fortified piece of the pie while everyone else dies and suffers. And unfortunately, I don't know how to get them to care about investing in this nation. I don't know. I really don't know. The only solution seems to be to just build your own and be a better person when you compete with these elite in the post-federal system, whatever comes. You have to just have something that you can barter with these elite, because they're amputating chunks of this empire for themselves.
I remember, what is it? This I think this relates somewhat to the previous topic that we had with these universities. I understand that I'm surrounded by 3 Catholics here, but I'm going to make the comparison. When Henry VIII seized all of the monasteries in England, when he broke from the Catholic Church, I'm not going to speak to theological issues. The church owned 1/3 of the land in England. The priests in England, I'm not going to speak to anywhere else in Europe. The priests in England were living in almost, extraordinary wealth, and it like the universities in the last segment that I think of, and much like how the elite that we have today are building these little communities. And I think it started when the WASPs basically threw their hands up in the 70s and said, we're cashing out. And you can still find, they have their own little fortified community. Sambash will talk about them. They're in Cape Cod and Martha's Vineyard. That's the ones that you know about. But then there's a bunch of other town names you don't know about. They're in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. They're in all of these other places with their, multi-million-dollar houses and their controlled county governments. And it is walled off and you can't get in. And they live amongst each other. And that's how this works. I agree with you that I don't want to see them just get away with it. But at the same time, it's like, well, what can you do? What can you do to hold them accountable to this? We have a money-based system. Unless you're willing to appeal to a power higher than gold, then I don't know. I don't think there's anything that can be done here.
I'll drop the text in the. I'll drop the texts in the chat here so you guys can read it in your own time.
Is this is one of those that undergraduate thesis that you have, or that graduate level thesis at Texas Tech you had me read?
That's a different one. These are the meeting minutes between the Roman Senate survived the fall of the Western Empire and became subject to the Ostrogothic kings. So they functioned as they functioned as the bureaucratic state under the Gothic kings, and the Gothic kings, being autistic Germans, recorded the meeting minutes. So you get to see the dialogues between the Roman senators and the Gothic kings, as the Gothic kings kind of like set up a medieval Dodge department to figure out what the hell went wrong here.
Odoaker did nothing wrong.
I mean, at one point he just berates this one senator, for living tax-free for 3 generations and not having paid a single cent of taxes for the local roads that were now in complete disrepair. And he's just yelling at him like, "Why haven't you paid for the roads? Why haven't you rebuilt the aqueducts? Why haven't you rebuilt the bridges? You're surrounded by like a third world state while you're living in the palace with your pristine town. Why aren't you contributing to the Italian Commonwealth?"
You know, that reminds me of some of the best universities in the South and elsewhere. Johns Hopkins and Duke immediately come to mind, in Baltimore and in Durham, respectively. Is that there are these like perfect little ivory tower. Princeton's another great example. Like beautiful places, beautiful campuses, well maintained, and they are just surrounded by the worst ghetto in the country, almost. You know, it's almost unbelievable, the contrast. And I can see I can see that exact thing that you're speaking of there. And I think part of it is, you know, Alex Jones, I know I'm going to cite him, but he has I don't know if I got it from him or if he got it from someone, but it's this concept of what's called a breakaway civilization. You know, I think that the elite of any society, especially when you add wealth and power to the mix, the elite of any society start seeing each other as the society, and they start looking at the people under them in any circumstance as, you know, I don't want to be lurid here, but let's just say foreigners is a right way of saying it. And that's not even within their conception, because we look at the world as, you know, or the German kings look at this country, look at the world as it's a commonwealth. It's like, you know, we're all trying to push into the same goal. We all have to live here, you know, but that's because we're middle class. That's because we're in the middle. That's because we're the ones who maintain the country. And the people who reap most of the benefit just simply don't look at it that way, you know? So yeah. I'm sure there's a psychology aspect to it. I know we had a funny little clip as to demonstrate the state of the national parks, where they're in. It's like, you want to strip mine them. It's like, well, they're already kind of being strip mined. Look who's inhabiting all of them. You know, it's a great live stream when we're forgetting to bring up our clips because the conversation is. Is
that Niagara Falls?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, well, that's been Indian Central for ages, but I can see there's even more now. Wow.
Yeah.